here back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Among his many accomplishments in life, my next guest is the executive producer of what is widely considered the most exciting and dynamic progressive radio program and television program in the United States. I am speaking, of course, of the Zero Hour's very own Troy Miller. He executive produces the show. This is our operation here, but he is also a writer who has published a great deal in West Virginia. He's a West Virginia activist. He is the West Virginia organizer for Social Security Works, and Social Security Works, under his guidance in West Virginia, has organized some protests and a rolling billboard, and he has a recent piece in the Charleston Gazette-Mail, an opinion piece entitled "Big Pharma's Greed is Fueling Inflation." So he joins us now. Well, he actually always joins us, but you don't usually hear him. So he joins us now on camera and on mic. Troy Miller, welcome to the Zero Hour.
Thanks so much for having me, Richard. It's always a pleasure to be on this side of the curtain and this side of the camera.
Yes, absolutely. Although it can wear you down too. But
I have to remember to look at the camera for one.
That's right. You don't look at your buttons now, and So Troy, West Virginia, as you know, it's a state I care about a lot, very interested in, and it's your home state. It's where you live now, thanks to the magic of work from home or work from farm, as it is in your case. And your senator, one of your two senators, Joe Manchin, is, for better or for worse, the man of the hour, I guess, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's never been such a popular time to be a West Virginian in national politics. And Joe Manchin seems to be really enjoying it, for better or for worse. And, I got to say, it's very exciting to have national organizations concerned and on the ground here in West Virginia. And starting, it seems to me, to take seriously that this is a state that, isn't as red and deep red as people think. It's not. That happened in the last 10 years or so, as Shane Esed-Zandy talked about a couple of weeks ago on this program. And I think that there is room for progressive wins here, and not just this sort of centrist Democrat, so-called centrist Democrat that's really just a conservative. And, we can talk more and more about that, but it is an absolutely bizarre time to be in my shoes, particularly, it feels like. But I'm absolutely honored to be in this fight with, the likes of you and Social Security Works at my back, and all of the great organizations on the ground here in West Virginia that we've begun organizing with and coalition building with.
And one of the things that we talk about, you and I talk about a lot when we're talking about booking the show or whatever, our guests talk about a lot, is the fact that to organize a state like West Virginia, you don't have to pretend to be conservative, but you do have to kind of focus on working people and their needs, and not, take the kind of elitist angle that is sometimes associated with the Democratic Party. You can be left populist, for example, and not pivot to the right in any way. And in terms of your column in the Gazette-Mail, one of the things I liked a lot about it was that it took what most people would consider, a pretty left point of view, I guess, although 70-80% of the population supports it, and that is doing something about drug prices. But it took that topic and it framed it in what Joe Manchin and others talk about as the issue du jour, which is inflation. And so the headline they gave you, I don't know if you wrote this headline or the paper gave it to you, but Big Pharma's greed is fueling inflation. That's kind of hitting the conservatives and so-called centrists where they live. So what gave you that thought to take that angle?
Well, we've had Professor Wolf on this program before recently talking about this issue of inflation. But in also one of the many hats I wear is you share me as executive producer with also Rebecca Vallis with Off Kilter. And Matt Stoller was on that program a couple of weeks ago. And the recurring thing here is there's this great, first of all, inflation is clearly the boogeyman that the Republicans are going to run against. But, this is right now in West Virginia, we're losing a district. And so we're going to have two incumbent Republicans, David McKinley and Alex Mooney, running against each other previously in separate districts and now running in the same northern district here. And Alex Mooney has already started attacking McKinley as not being Trump enough. And McKinley has had to respond that his voting record with Trump is better than Mooney's and all of this. But the thing that they're both harping on is this concept of like Bidenflation, right? And it's very clear. So they're making posts like beef prices are up 20% since last year. Christmas is going to be more expensive for West Virginians. And, then you do just a little bit of Sherlock Holmesing and thinking about it, and you Google, you use your resources, and you find that, well, meat packers are netting 300% more profits over the last year than they were before. So it seems to me with some rudimentary arithmetic, and you could get really nitty gritty with these numbers, but like there's more than enough room for them to cut out a little bit of their profits, still get plenty of profits, 200%, let's say, and cut out that inflation on the prices. This isn't about inflation in the sense that people think about in like the Weimar Republic or something that, there's so many Deutsche Marks flying around and we're in such debt to the rest of the world.
Right.
The dollar is remaining relatively strong. This is not that type of inflation. What we're seeing is corporate greed. And what we're seeing is really the fruits of 40 years of failed Reaganomics, neoliberal economics, third way economics, whatever the hell you want to call it, and it really coming to roost after 10 years of a recession that we didn't address properly, and then rolling back all of any protections that we had to protect against the corporate bribery that we've now made illegal in our system. And so, what we have is just corporate greed that then is being turned around, paid out to shareholders. The consumers are seeing raised prices, shareholders are seeing increased dividends, and somehow there's constantly more lobbyists on the Hill to tell us that this is the result of too much government spending. And so I wanted to take this issue head on, and you and I have been working in this on lower pharmaceutical drug prices for years now, you longer than myself, but what we know is that even in years of low inflation, even in like 2019 when inflation was right around 1.8%, pharmaceutical drug prices across the board on average went up by over 10%. And when you look at a smaller index, and a relatively smaller index being 3,400 drugs, they went up by over 17% in the first 6 months of 2019 alone. And so this is actually killing people, particularly people on fixed incomes who aren't seeing the cost of living adjustments they need in those years of low inflation. So how can we take this on? We can have Medicare negotiate on behalf of the Medicare recipients, and it takes inflation directly on.
Yeah, let me take absolutely, Troy Miller, and let me take some of your comments in sequence. First of all, I hope before we began recording this segment, the executive producer warned you against using bad language because, hell is not a really bad word, but we are FCC compliant. I just warned. Number two, these two Republicans that now have to run against each other. I was not one of those kids who used to put two red ants in a jar and watch them fight, but I imagine what satisfaction kids got out of that. I get when two Republicans are forced to run against each other. But more importantly, and more to your point, I couldn't agree with you more about inflation, that, the classic inflation is, what's the saying? Too few dollars chasing too many goods. This is a matter of some very specific choke points, right? It's fuel prices, it's supply chain problems, it's greed, like the kind you described with the meat industry. And for people trying to stay alive, you're absolutely right. It's drug prices. And as you point out in your list, in your article, rather, the senior list reports that West Virginia, fifth most expensive state for per capita prescription drug spending, coming in at just under $2,000 per person per year. It also includes some of the poorest counties in the entire nation. McDowell County, second poorest, and so on. So 90. So you have some really impressive and shocking statistics here that I hope get some attention in the state of West Virginia. I don't know if you want to talk about any others that you found.
Well, I mean, 1 in 4 West Virginians is on Medicare, and this would help those people directly. And this is really the focus right now, is making these provisions available for the people who are currently on Medicare and capping some of these costs for people who are currently using the program. Now, you and I both know that that's not really the end game here. The end game, because we have a ton of people also on Medicaid, is and a ton of people who are, all in between all these different places and simply can't afford the health insurance at $1,800 a month for the good programs and $900 a month for the ones that barely cover anything. And that's just to, be able to pay more later. What we need is Medicare for all. And what we need is a single payer program in this country that really actually covers everyone and can negotiate with the multinational corporations who literally profit off of holding us for ransom for our lives. 90% of West Virginians are either using a prescription drug or live in a household with someone who uses a prescription drug. Now, that is I feel like a statistic that is not terribly shocking. People might assume that. What bothers me is that I can't imagine that there are 10% of West Virginians who are so healthy that that their lives couldn't be improved with the use of a prescription drug, that they are not afforded because they are not able to access, either because they don't have the time or the money or the employment that provides the insurance to go and see the doctor to find out what is wrong with them. And if they have done that, it is oftentimes too expensive for them. We've talked before about how there is motivation for people, or demotivation rather, aside from the politicization of vaccines and everything. There are real concerns from working people that the vaccines aren't actually going to be free, and that they're going to have to pay some hidden costs, either in time off work that they might not be able to take, or in another way, because every time they engage with our healthcare system for what it is, which is actually a sickness for profit system, they are getting charged, and they're getting charged more and more every year, and you have more and more people dropping out completely, which only compounds the issues. We know that this state has tremendous health problems. There is a lobbyist down in Charleston I believe she's with the Manufacturers Association here in West Virginia, who has argued before our legislature that we can afford ourselves to loosen water toxin standards because we are more obese than other states and we drink less water than people in other states. This is what the industry has stood down in Charleston and made the case of, and our senator needs to step up and do the right thing here and vote yes for Build Back Better before they go on recess. And it might make for a little bit of an awkward Christmas dinner with his daughter Heather Brash, who might take a little bit on the chin here, because we're going to be, aggressively negotiating these prices with the
And
likes of her.
explain why his daughter, I'm sorry to interrupt, Troy, but
No,
explain
please.
why his daughter might take a little
For those who don't remember or might not have caught it back when, I think it was 2016 or 2017, it was right around the time Martin Shkreli became a famous household name as the pharma bro for hiking the price of whatever the drug was that was for the specific immunodeficiency group of people who needed that, and he hiked it by thousands of percent. Heather Brash was doing the same thing with EpiPens. And she was the head of Mylan Pharmaceuticals. There's a whole aside to this where her master's degree is of questionable authenticity. She had to go back and finish school because there were classes that maybe she never attended, but she was awarded for, and that's a mind-boggling saga in of itself. But then she became I believe, the president or chairperson of Mylan Pharmaceuticals. Mylan Pharmaceuticals produced EpiPen. What they also were producing in the Mylan plant, that then I believe became the Viatris plant or Viatris in Morgantown, West Virginia, were generic drugs that was the only generic drug manufacturing plant in this country until they decided to shut it down just this year. And that is if there is one story about the raw cruelty of the pharmaceutical industry. It's this idea that they raised prices on Americans and West Virginians year after year under the guise that, like, well, we need to keep manufacturing in America. And so everyone else has to pay more so we can keep these jobs here. And eventually it just became clear that they were going to take the private equity route, the financialized route, and say, actually, it's cheaper to produce this in India like everywhere else. And so now we're in a country in the midst of a pandemic still, where we don't have generic drug manufacturing onshore, and that is insane.
Well, it's insane from a national security perspective, for lack of a better term. It's well, okay, we're not actually producing the pharmaceuticals we need to protect our lives here on shore. So if anything happens to disrupt the supply chain, we're in deep trouble. Now, in terms of Joe Manchin and his daughter, and the whole family and his private interest holdings and interest and so on, despite all of that, Joe Manchin says that he thinks we should lower drug prices, right? So what, if anything, is he actually doing either for lowering drug prices or against lowering drug prices?
I mean, he's basically said, as every people frequently do, that they think that Medicare should be able to negotiate drug prices. Medicaid does, the VA does, and they do it successfully. And this, I would have to find the quote, but I saw someone draw this up a week or so ago. I think it was a quote from him saying, like, basically that verbatim in 2017. Now, I am ever the optimist, as you know, Richard. I am ever the optimist that despite all of these conflicts of interest, I think that Joe Manchin is a more honest man than he's being made out to be in the media. I think he does want to help West Virginians, and I think we have a major problem with how many lobbyists are paid to flood the halls of Congress so that they honestly believe things like, they need to raise prices to pursue more research and development. And they need to be, tripling the price of insulin over a decade to do that. And they need to be raising prices in lockstep to do that. Somehow, they've hired enough lobbyists to flood people's offices like Joe Manchin to convince them that that's the case. I am deeply concerned when Joe Manchin says that he hasn't heard from West Virginians about these issues, that he might be telling the truth. And the problem is there's a line of lobbyists out his door who are waiting with, basically checks in hand and research in hand to plop down on his desk. And the West Virginians are waiting on hold because we can't necessarily afford to get to his office and stand there in line. I don't think it's a literal line, to be clear, but you know what I'm saying. You come from this. Yeah. You come from this industry. Yeah. You know exactly how perverse and how much money is spent from healthcare as a big, large industry in order to convince us that we can't have things like lower drug prices in this country. Oh, every other country in the world has figured this out, but we can't have it, right?
Right. Now, as West Virginia organizer for Social Security Works, you, Troy Miller, and the others, you had some rallies around, you and the team had some rallies around the state with a billboard truck. And I love the billboard. I think the billboard truck is a cool idea. And it was addressed to Joe Manchin, right? I can't remember exactly what it said.
But. Well, it was addressed to his constituents, and it said very simply that Freudian slip, not President Manchin, Senator Manchin. Although he's acting like President Manchin right now. Senator Manchin says he wants to lower pharmaceutical drug prices, and the Build Back Better Act would allow this to happen. And so call your senator at the 304 office number. I don't have it in front of me right now, and tell him you want him to vote yes on Build Back Better. So it's addressed to the constituents of West Virginia, and it's gotten a lot. I've gotten my hometown is Wheeling. I know I've gotten a number of people who have messaged me and say they've seen it and they've called. And in Morgantown, we had a fantastic turnout for that rally, and it was actually incredible to me. And I used it as a rhetorical device, but we had a lot of students who just couldn't make it because it's finals week at WVU. So final projects, final papers, final exams, studying all of this, the middle of the day on Thursday, and on a cold Thursday at that. not like the balmy weather here right now in Eastern Panhandle, West Virginia, where it's like 65 degrees. My office temperature says 75, but it was cold and it was in the middle of finals week, and they're all doing their final projects, and we need Joe Manchin to do this as his final project on the year. We need him to vote yes on Build Back Better, not kick this to next year, not allow another West Virginian to have to choose between whether they're heating their home or whether they're going to ration a dose for insulin. 24% of West Virginians have reported rationing or skipping a dose of their drugs. And that was, I believe, in 2017. A lot of these stats hurt me because so many of them are from 2019, 2017. We haven't gotten the data yet for 2020,
Right.
2021.
Right.
But I am confident that the number of people on Medicare in West Virginia has gone up since a lot of these stats were taken. I am confident that more people have had to make these harder choices. And I'm afraid that if they haven't, it's because the mortality rate in this state has been so great through the pandemic, especially among seniors. What was the statistic I think I saw in the New York Times among Americans? One out of every
Right.
100
Seniors.
American seniors died during the
Yes.
pandemic. I can't imagine that West Virginia fared better.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you point out in your piece, some 35,000 children in West Virginia are being raised by their grandparents, which makes it even more of a human tragedy. And it was enough of one to begin with. So, Joe Manchin is now famously dragging his feet on signing off on Build Back Better. Where are we, Troy, in terms of, if you know, in terms of what, I don't want to put you on the spot. I know you worked for Tom Hartman, who's great at doing that, by the way. But in 1847, what was the percentage? So if you know, what in its current form would Build Back Better do for drug prices?
Well, I mean, for one, it would cap expenditures for, I believe, Medicare recipients and for insulin at $2,000 a year. And
I
when
think
we're
for all
I think
medications,
for all
actually.
medications, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
sorry, you put me on the spot, and I didn't want to
Sorry.
over-assert wrongly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when we're looking at a state that per capita is already spending, I think the actual tally is $1,980 per capita per year, so just under $2,000. Next year that's going to translate as real savings because of
Right.
the rate of inflation on drug prices, which is, again, I just want to emphasize this, right? They're doing this amazing sort of shell game with the name, with the word inflation, because what they mean is just prices are going up. But what they really
Right.
want us to think about is Weimar Republic Germany and wheelbarrows full of money not being able to buy a bread loaf, or they want to associate with Jimmy Carter, which I think, again, that's not the same type of inflation that people think of it as
Right.
either. And I think Jimmy Carter made a tremendous mistake in trying to use that Milton Friedman neoliberal libertarian logic of too much government spending, and but that set up Thatcher and Reagan, because what was actually happening was that the petrodollar
Right.
was experiencing inflation, and what we should have done was aggressively moved away from the petrodollar and expanded our social welfare nets. But we're now 50 years, 40 years on in this experiment, and frankly, the corporations have learned that there's no need to let a good crisis go to waste. What
Right.
happened
And
after the last collapse here? They got bailed out, they got paid off, and nothing changed except for they can bribe our officials more easily thanks to Citizens United.
right. No, you're absolutely right. It's a kind of vicious circle between politics and corporate economics. Um, before we before we get, I want to kind of reminisce, think about the year before I let you go, Troy. But before we do that, so what's the status of the campaign to, communicate, to have voters of West Virginia communicate with Joe Biden? I'm not going to say pressure. I mean,
Man,
another Freudian, Joe Manchin, President Manchin, as you call him. What's the campaign to get voters to communicate their needs and wishes to their senator, Mr. Manchin, the campaign that Social Security Works is doing?
Well, from our side, we're going to continue to apply pressure. The billboard truck is going around for the next couple of days. I know because I produced this program that this will be out on Saturday. I think that's the last day that it's going around for this particular part of the year. But we're going to continue to use the connections that we've built through this campaign the last 2 weeks. And there is so much amazing work being done on the ground from student canvassers going around and talking to people directly about the bill, but also having people call Joe Manchin right there on the spot. And,
Great. Yeah.
talking to people, it doesn't matter whether they're Trump supporters or anything. You walk right up to someone's house with a Trump flag. Guess what? They still want lower drug prices. And when you actually talk to them about how Medicare works and how this would help everyone on Medicare immediately, and basically everyone over the largest economic sense over all too, people understand it. People want the American government to work for them, despite what the conservatives run around. And I don't even think they're conservatives. I want to sidestep real quick and say that if there's anyone Pollyannish on this issue right now, I think I am an optimist because I think Joe Manchin can and will vote against whatever conflicts of interest are apparent there. But I think Joe Manchin is honestly being a little Pollyannish, very Pollyannish, in trying to negotiate with basically a party that is a bad faith den of thieves who believe in nothing except for more of the corporate greed that we've already seen. And that's the
And the
problem.
Republicans are even worse. I'm sorry, I couldn't avoid making that joke. I'm sorry.
That's the
Please
right. And
continue.
that's the problem, though. I mean, we have people on both parties who are bought and sold, and
Right.
there are people who their districts are heavily populated by not generic pharmaceutical
I
drug makers, but by health insurance companies, for instance, or the or copayment, or the I'm sorry, the what the hell are the benefit managers and all the other middlemen who run around and suck up our money and cause prices to go up. I am afraid that Joe Manchin is working in a time where it's like he thinks it's like working with Tip O'Neill or something. He thinks that there's still this sense of the Republicans wanting to get anything done, and the reality is their donors are perfectly happy with nothing changing. They don't
right.
care. They just want more money, and they're making plenty of it right now. As long as the Democrats don't get anything done, they'll continue. They'll win both ways. And, I am still of the belief that the Democratic Party, as Shane Zandy kind of said, and I think it's a fair enough analogy, it's easier to steal a car than build a new one. And I think the roots are there and the history is on our side with this. Um, I unfortunately think that Joe Manchin, it does come from this legacy of third way Democrats who were terribly beaten up in the 80s by Reagan and all the others. And just exactly what Ryan Grimm has written about in his book, We've Got People, but published by our friends at Strong Arm Press. And I think that is probably one of the hardest things to break through here with him, is just this sort of 30 years of codification of like, well, no, we have to include the private sector and we have to listen to
Right.
we have to get this
Right.
both sides of the thing. And the reality is there are only two sides to this particular issue: their profits and the more pharmaceutical greed, or our lives and more affordable prescription drugs for West Virginians, so that people aren't having to choose whether to feed their grandkids who they're raising or whether to get their next dose of insulin that they need.
Right. And potentially die on their grandkids.
Exactly. And I would just want to add that, like, so many
Sure.
times in West Virginia, the case is that those grandparents are raising their grandkids because of this, of another, and you're well familiar with this issue, because of another set of pharmaceutical greedy liars who put a fire hose of marketing and opioids directly into Appalachia, and resulted in a lot of people my age and older and younger, and it does not matter, dying with it and leaving behind kids who are now being raised by their grandparents who are now bereft with the loss of their son or daughter, who might be in the I hate to say this, in one of the better cases scenario, just in jail rather than in the grave, and
Right.
raising their kids for raising a second set of kids on a fixed income, with the benefits that they've earned and worked hard for all their lives at the time when they're supposed to be enjoying this state the most. And it's
And those
grotesque.
kids, yeah, and those kids have already suffered the death or incarceration of a parent, or a parent winding up on the street or whatever, might any day walk in on a grandparent who has died because they couldn't afford their insulin. So the brutality of it is almost unthinkable. And by the way, before we leave the topic of Senator Manchin, if you are listening to this from West Virginia, I'm gonna have a word with the executive producer, Troy. We're gonna put this up early so that people in West Virginia can see it before Saturday. And if you are a West Virginian and want to let your senator know how you feel, his office phone number in Washington, D.C., 202 224 3954. That's 202 224 3954. Call Senator Manchin if you're a West Virginian and let him know how you feel. And Troy, before we bring this to an end,
This
I
is
don't
what
know about.
the billboard truck looks like, by the
Oh,
way. And
nice.
the other number that you can use,
Of
man, I wish I
course, we're
knew the
on
producer.
radio,
Yeah,
but
exactly. Well, and even on the
yeah,
video side, I wish our producer knew how to put that graphic in there
right.
fancily. But
No,
the
it
number
worked.
on the billboard truck is 304-342-5855. So either that 202 number that Richard
Oh
read
no, that's
or
his Charleston, West Virginia. I have it all in front of me now. Charleston, West Virginia, 304-342-5855. Call now for act now. Um, and before we go, Troy, I just wanted to say I am mind blown that the January 6th, whatever you want to call it, riot, uprising, whatever, was almost a year ago. This is our last show of the year. And this year has just seemed to have gone by like lightning. And I don't say that in a good way.
well, and from my point of view, it seems like pretty much every week of the year since about March has been what's Joe Manchin going to do? And I mean,
Right.
you've been on our staff meetings at Social Security Works. It's this week again. It's just always
Right.
been this week again. And I believe in, I don't know if it's miracles or optimism or that three specters are going to haunt Joe Manchin in the middle of the night and get him to vote for Build Back Better. Stranger things have happened in U.S. politics. I'll remind listeners of, the New Deal was on the line and the Supreme Court had went on recess and came back. I can't remember the exact years, but there were a series of minimum wage cases, state minimum wage cases that were up,
Right. Right. That's right.
and they were slamming them down left and right, and they came back and they upheld one, and all of a sudden the New Deal was back off the chopping block, and we could start talking about actually how to improve this country. And it was one Supreme Court justice's change of heart. We don't know why exactly. We don't know what happened or who talked to whom or who explained what or what the change of heart was, but it happened. And I think this can happen with Joe Manchin too. I'm optimistic, especially if we call these numbers. And that's unfortunately, that's most of what the year is for me. The other thing that, speaking of inflation, you know, one of the places where there are real supply chain chokes happening right now are because of climate disasters that we are still
Right.
reconciling us from last year. The windstorms that took out vast amounts of our grain supplies in the Midwest and disrupted our oil infrastructure, and should have been making very clear to people that maybe the thing we don't want, maybe we don't want a hyper efficient just in time economy. Maybe we want
Right.
an economy that's damn resilient and doesn't leave people behind at the first shake of a pandemic that, as Professor Wolf has said many times, it's not the first pandemic in history. We know how to address these things, and we failed. And what we ended up doing was allowing a lot of people to make a lot of money off of one of the worst crises in my lifetime. It's still ongoing. 1 in 100 American seniors.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. And I think that's a great summary of the year. And I love the spiritual principle behind your expectation that Joe Manchin will do the right thing. So, Joe, buddy, it's not too late. We think you're going to step up and be a hero. So, Troy Miller, West Virginia organizer for Social Security Works and executive producer of the Zero Hour, the very program you're listening to. Thanks for all the great work you've been doing here. I'll thank you for the whole year's worth of great work. And of course, in organizing as well. And thanks for coming on the program.
It's my absolute pleasure, Richard, and thank you for all you do with this program. You know, we're a feisty team, and I'm proud to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have a little fun too. So we'll
We've
be
got to
right back
try.
after we try. We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.